Tonight we have a sort of United Nations programme. American films, French films, Canadian films, and even a British film. All the other movies are about people, but the British one is about rabbits. Well, that's the way it is with us British. Deep down we've always preferred animals to people. However, the first of the American pictures is a thriller called Driver, in which Ryan O'Neill is pursued by Bruce Dern, and the second, Girlfriends, is about women and was directed by a woman, Claudia Weil. From Canada comes another thriller, Blood Relatives, starring Donald Sutherland and directed by a Frenchman, Claude Chabrol. And since Claude, and female versions of it, seems to be the Christian name of the week, I should also mention Second Chance, the latest offering from Claude Lelouch. With the half-term holidays coming up, yes, already, it hardly seems possible, does it? We have the inevitable Disney, Pete's Dragon, and a British animated version of Watership Down, the bestseller that said in effect, let's really hear it for the rabbits. And in addition, Film Harmonic celebrates 50 years of Fox films, and we have another of our awful moments from the movies. But back now to Driver, which is one of those films in which nobody has a name. Ryan O'Neill, a professional getaway driver for bank robbers and the like, is known simply as the driver. Bruce Dern, the detective who pursues him, is called the detective. Isabelle Adjani, who plays a gambler, is known simply as the player, and so on. Still, let's have a look at some of the action. Ryan O'Neill helping sundry bank robbers to get away from the cops. He's the guy who passed me on the motorway this morning. I always feel rather uneasy when confronted by a picture in which the characters are identified only by their occupations or their appearance. This one, for example, includes a couple of villains called Glasses and Teeth. I have this fear that such a film is suddenly going to creep up and hit me behind the ear with an allegory. But Driver luckily isn't like that. It simply concerns Bruce Dern's obsessive desire to trap and arrest Ryan O'Neill, largely by means of an elaborate setup which even in America could hardly have had the approval of his superiors in the police force. Why he should be so relentless in this pursuit and how he manages to have no other work to do for days on end is one of the flaws in the story. Another is O'Neill's habit of walking deliberately into traps when any fool could see them a mile off. Still, never mind. What we have is a deadly game between the two men, with Isabelle Adjani as an enigmatic pawn with the power to shift the balance either way. It's a very interesting picture, tightly directed by Walter Hill, who also wrote it. There's a good number of car chases, of course, which is a bit unfashionable these days, but they're quite freshly done, especially the sequence in which Mr. O'Neill sets out to demolish a brand new Mercedes in about 30 seconds flat. Incidentally, Ryan O'Neill, who, as readers of the gossip columns will be aware, has been rather less well known lately for his acting than for the ardour with which he chases women, a kind of poor girl's Warren Beatty. But he's splendidly cast in the impassive role of the driver, and Bruce Dern, positively exuding menace, as the ideal foil as the detective. Here's the moment when Dern makes it clear that what they're both involved in is indeed a game.
Present. I brought it for you. Found it on the floorboard of some Ford a cowboy boosted. Go ahead, take it. Save you the trouble of making another one. I really like chasing you.
Sounds like you got a problem.
Oh, I'm much better at this game than you are. You play against me, pal, you're gonna lose. You win, you make some money. I win, you're gonna do 15 years. How about it, driver?
Driver is now out on general release and well worth a visit. The same could be said with even more enthusiasm for Girlfriends, which alas is only on in London at the moment, though it should be going out to other parts of the country soon. It's the first commercial movie to be financed from American public funds. Girlfriends is a modest and slender little tale about the friendship of two girls who, when we first meet them, are sharing a flat in New York. The principal character, played endearingly and myopically by Melanie Mayron, supports herself by snapping weddings and bar mitzvahs, but aspires to being a serious and artistic photographer. When her flatmate, the blonde Anita Skinner, unexpectedly moves out to get married, Miss Mayron is left alone and often lonely to cope with the difficult business of making a life and a career in the big city. This strand of the story deals with her relationships with such people as a married rabbi, nicely played by Eli Wallach, a somewhat insensitive teacher who becomes her lover, and a young dancer who rooms with her for a while. But the main theme of the film is friendship, the friendship of the two girls, and the strains placed upon it and the changes wrought in it by Miss Skinner's marriage. The picture was directed by Claudia Weil, her first feature film, and an excellent job she made of it too, without special pleading or sentimentality, although with a lot of help from the oddly attractive Melanie Mayron. She makes her main character immensely touching and quite unforgettable. In this scene, Anita Skinner breaks the news of her impending marriage.
And you won't believe it. You're going to be famous and I'm going to be famous.
Tell me, what happened?
I did it. They're taking 3 of my pictures. 3 pictures, and one of them is of you.
Oh, Susan, that's fantastic. Which ones?
One of the kids, the one of David's feet, and one of the morning ones of you.
But I'm half naked.
No, you're not naked, They love the lighting. That was their favorite one.
Oh, Susan,
I'm gonna get paid! Isn't that incredible? No more bar mitzvahs.
I'm so excited. It's fantastic.
No more weddings.
One more wedding?
Never, never. I'll never do another wedding again. Annie, I can't believe it. They love them.
My wedding?
What do you mean you're not getting married?
I'm getting married.
What?
Martin and I are.
Annie. That's great.
Susan?
How can you get married? I mean, you don't even know him. Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Well, how can you be sure when you're so unsure?
I don't know, but I am.
As I said, Girlfriends isn't on release yet, but when it does come your way, watch out for it. And while I'm on this enthusiastic streak, I will also commend to you Claude Chabrol's Blood Relatives, which is a thriller starring Donald Sutherland and is set in Canada and is Chabrol's first film in English, the first, I hope, of many. At which point, I suppose, I'd better point out that I am a Chabrol enthusiast because I reckon he handles a thriller as well as anyone since Hitchcock. Blood Relatives is based on a novel by Ed McBain and has Mr. Sutherland as a cop trying to solve the brutal murder of a 17-year-old girl. The only eyewitness is the girl's 15-year-old cousin, who accuses her brother of the crime. But did he really do it, and if so, why? Chabrol turns what is basically a simple mystery story into a fascinating study of character and relationships that grips the attention right to the end, even though it's fairly easy to guess the identity and motive of the culprit quite early on. Excellent performances by Donald Sutherland, the 2 young girls, Lisa Langlois and Aude Landry, and in a supporting role, David Hemmings. My only complaint is that Chabrol actually makes the elegant Stéphane Audran look dowdy, an almost impossible feat, I should have said, and certainly one that isn't even worth attempting. Just watch it, Chabrol. Don't do it again. Anyway, here she is, explaining to Donald Sutherland why her son was so upset by the girl's death.
It's going to take him a long time to get over it. I think he blames himself.
Why do you say that, Mrs. Lowry?
Well, he was supposed to go to the birthday party at Paul's with them, but the restaurant called. He always needs extra pocket money for his records. He could have saved her had he finished at the restaurant just a few minutes earlier.
I'm not sure I follow exactly what you're trying to say, ma'am.
After work, he went to get the girls at the party, but they'd already left.
Your son went to the party?
And what did he do there?
Huh? He went looking for them.
In the street?
Yes. But it started to rain, and he thought they might have come back to Paul, so he went back there, but they weren't there. So he went looking for them again, but he still couldn't find them. Come in, sweetheart. Finally, he came home alone, a little before midnight, and I really started to worry. And I called the police station.
Patricia, Sergeant Detective Klinger and myself would like to extend to you our sympathies. I apologize, but I have to ask you something. I hope you'll understand. It's because you're the only person who can help us with this.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this before?
Yes.
Where?
It's the knife that killed Muriel. This is the knife the man used.
Right, now those of you who wrote to tell me a couple of months ago that I was wrong to call Grease Olivia Newton-John's film debut are now no doubt going to tell me I'm wrong to call Blood Relatives Chabrol's first English film. Well, I was wrong about Olivia Newton-John, but I'm right about Chabrol. He's made 2 other pictures in French and English, but he himself regards Blood Relatives as his first totally English-speaking picture, even though some of the characters are obviously dubbed. Work that out for yourselves. Meanwhile, let's move on to consider a totally French film, Violette et Francois, starring Isabelle Adjani. You remember she was the female interest in Driver. It's a sort of bittersweet love story, this one. Mademoiselle Adjani and Jacques Dutonc are a couple with a small baby who support themselves by doing odd jobs and eventually by shoplifting. Rather clumsily, I'd have thought. I'm sure London has scores of Arab visitors who could teach them how to do it much more efficiently. Anyway, the story is about the way in which this career of petty crime affects them and their marriage. The director, Jacques Ruffio, says it's a film about the triumph of life and love over the temptations of despair and death, whatever that means. I thought it was prettily played, but not very convincing. A rather meatier French film is Second Chance, directed by Claude Lelouch, and like Girlfriends, dealing with the friendship between 2 women. In this case, however, both the women, Catherine Deneuve and Anouk Aimee, are ex-convicts looking for a second chance in their late 30s. Again, it's not altogether convincing, and indeed the prison background is largely played down. It could almost as well have been about 2 divorcees setting up house together. But it was nice to see Anouk Aimee again after 7 years away from the cinema, and the subplot about her seduction of Mademoiselle Deneuve's 15-year-old son is at least unusual. Here's the scene in which the 2 women discuss this unconventional affair.
How could you do such a thing? Couldn't you stand being good?
How'd you find out?
How did I find out? How did I find out? Really, you've no sense of decency. No, we're closed.
It seemed he was old enough to learn what the difference between his mother and other women was. Besides, it's not so odd. A boy always falls in love with his mother's best friend.
But he's only a child.
I don't know. Look, wasn't it better me than with someone you don't know?
But what are you going to come up with next? You're liable to do God knows what next. What else are you planning to do?
You'd make the cutest grandmother.
You're out of your mind. That's all I have to say. Oh, seriously now, don't you see he's going to fall in love and get hurt because you're so charming and pretty? You do know you're charming.
I won't have any trouble making him want out when the proper time comes.
You know, for 2 ladies of a certain age, as the French so charmingly put it, they're not bad, are they? Well, both women, you'll have noticed, are dubbed into English by other people, thus neatly robbing the film of practically all its French flavour. United Artists seem to be aware of this because in London they're putting out 2 versions, a dubbed print at the Cinecentre in Leicester Square and a subtitled version at the Minimar in Knightsbridge. Lowbrow plebs are requested to queue up in Leicester Square, intellectuals, linguists and people who simply feel that for full appreciation a French film should be played in French will kindly make their way to Knightsbridge. Both versions open next Thursday, and the press, who cover the whole spectrum from intellectual to would-be intellectual to lowbrow pleb, will see the subtitle print. Well, now it's almost half-term again, an event that can only be welcomed by school children, teachers and the purveyors of what are known as family films, and inevitably there are various family films about. One of them is a British production, a £2 million animated version of Richard Adams' best-selling novel Watership Down. It's all about rabbits, though I suppose it's hardly necessary to point that out now, since everyone in the country seems to have read the book except me. Still, the film has been 4 years in the making and has a royal world premiere in London next Thursday. It was made, by the way, in a studio off Warren Street. Well, where else would you make a film about rabbits? This is a brief rundown of what creating a full-length animated movie entails.
The film begins modestly as a comic strip storyboard, the subject of daily debate between producer Martin Rosen and his staff.
Bam, come right down on it.
The staff consists of 80 researchers, artists and animators creating 200,000 drawings, a figure later reduced to a mere 75,000 when the film story has been fully worked out.
Gordon, we just finished the storyboard, the new Holly confrontation, which didn't work the first time. Take a look at this.
Yeah.
We want a multi-plane shot or multi-panning shot from Holly's point of view with the voiceover of the group talking to Bigwig.
He's creeping up on him through this.
Creeping up on him, parting the bushes.
The storyboard becomes the team's Bible. A wrong judgment or a missed nuance at this stage will prove expensive, both in time and money, if it has to be altered later.
Reaction takes him back.
Yeah.
Ends up with a mouthful of fur. For the first time in the picture, Hazel assumes a leadership stance.
At a much earlier point than in a film featuring live actors, the animation team have to decide exactly how the film is going to look, which character moves where and why, and so on.
And then realising that it's Bigwig, and his expression changes.
Once the storyboard is settled, and this contains every shot in the film, the drawings are pinned to the wall in sequence and backgrounds are sketched in.
Looking up at Bigwig, who's on screen elsewhere, and Holly comes bounding in from over camera.
These rough sketches are turned into finished backgrounds quite early on in the picture's progress. Overlays are added to give depth and movement.
I've graded this portion of the background so that it throws back against this overlay here. The sky, I think, fairly much the same tone as the ground, in fact, to keep an overall key colour all over.
Hundreds of backgrounds are produced in this way to create a landscape for the rabbits to inhabit, each artist remembering to keep his style consistent with that of the others. Elsewhere in the building, the rabbit characters themselves are being animated. The artists produce a series of pencil sketches that will eventually become the moving pictures, paying particular attention to the characters' lip movements, which are timed to fit the already recorded dialogue. They work out the smallest number of drawings necessary to make any movement effective and, of course, in keeping with the character of each rabbit. These black and white drawings are then photographed frame by frame with an overhead movie camera as a test run. Here, the rabbit's head is being made to move, thus the only drawings which change are those of his head. It can take a whole day to film one small sequence of movement, but you still won't know till later whether it actually worked. So in the editing room, the producer and his team anxiously check the result. So far, so good. But will the shots cut together?
Just hold it there for a second, all right. Let's see, there's our characters. Kipling comes up from behind the five.
Yeah. I guess
Landline's in the foreground.
Just need this foreground painting in the other shot for that match.
There's probably cutting frames on the start of that anyway.
There are, yeah.
But Silver's dialogue with him, is he alone?
Yeah. Yeah, yes. It's a nice cut round from there.
Now that the animation works, the characters must be fine drawn and coloured in. This is a time-consuming job for a large team of highly skilled colouring artists, taking great care to ensure that the colour of each character remains constant. So, numbered paint pots are used for each individual. A large quantity is mixed at the beginning of the movie, and only that particular numbered colour is used for that particular character. Altogether, 70 different colours were mixed for the different rabbits in Watership Down. The coloured animals are then placed in the backgrounds. Painted on transparent sheets, they can be precisely located by means of special pins around the drawing. Then they're carefully checked for any errors of movement or colour. Finally, they're photographed frame by frame, as they were for the earlier tests, using once again the overhead movie camera. And this is the finished result.
They seem sad. Like trees in November.
Yeah, well, I still think we've made a big change for the better.
Do you think the man puts the food out there because of a kind heart?
Well, it's not poison.
There's something unnatural and evil and twisted about this place. It feels like mist, like being deceived and losing our way.
Some of us are gathering and suggesting stories. We're hoping you'll tell one.
Oh, Hazel can tell you about our adventures and how we had the good luck to join you. Surely there's no harm in that.
Dandelion, why don't you tell us a story of El Herrera?
El Herrera and his trickery don't really mean very much to us. Charming as it is.
Rabbits will always need tricks.
No, we need dignity. and above all, the will to accept our fate. As one of our poets is fond of saying, if I may quote...
Yes, of course. Why not? Please do.
Where are you going, stream? Far, far away. Take me with you, stream. Take me on your dark journey. Lord Frith, oh, take me far away to the heart of light. The silence. I give you my breath, my life. The silence.
I've had enough.
Well, I repeat, The Watership Down is a British picture, but as I expect you realised, it has an American producer. Good luck to Martin Rosen, of course, but couldn't a British producer have snapped up this very British subject? Ah, well. Animation is also involved, partly at least, in the new Disney film Pete's Dragon, which is a predictable Disney effort about a cute little orphan boy running away from nasty hillbilly-type foster parents and finding refuge with nice but drunken Mickey Rooney and his equally nice but sober daughter Helen Reddy. Subsidiary comic villains like Red Buttons and Jim Dale are also involved, but naturally the little lad is saved by his amiable dragon, who is called Elliot and looks like an amalgamation of every animal the Disney studios have ever produced. Elliot, of course, is the animated character, just as animated, in fact, as any of the humans, and a good deal more animated than the songs and music, which have the rare distinction of being forgettable even while you're listening to them. Jim Dale is rather good, and so is Jim Backus as the local mayor, while Shelley Winters as the evil foster mother makes in effect 3 appearances, 1 covered in mud, 2 covered in dust, and 3 covered in oil, but none of these substances is thick enough to disguise the ham underneath. Sean Marshall, who plays Peter, is one of those kids who are obviously mass-produced in the Disney factory. I have this mental image of hundreds of them going round and round on a conveyor belt while somebody sprays freckles all over them with a paint gun. Anyway, here he is, singing one of those songs in duet with Elliot.
Remember the night when you first confided, and things went so right that we both decided. Now we're together and life is perfect. Don't ever disappear. Oh, really? Oh, you're just saying it. Is it true? I love you too. We're walking down a road of our own where rain can never fall. I'm glad I don't have to be alone. You know what to say when I want direction. You don't turn away when I need protection. Your voice is the sound of an angel singing, music I wait to hear. Say it again, and again. Everything seems so new. I love you too. I love you too. I love you too.
Well, Pete's Dragon has just opened in London. It did very well in America around Christmas time, and Variety, the showbiz newspaper, described its success thus: Dragon Whammo 35G. Translated into English, that means it was rather popular and in 1 week took $35,000 at the box office. Variety, which is the Bible of the money men in the movie business, is much given to this kind of eccentric language. Zombie a live wire at Italo BO, it says, which doesn't mean that a new wonder deodorant called Zombie has finally conquered body odour in Italy, but that a film called Zombie is packing them in at the Italian box office. Likewise, Fever, Heidi, Capricorn, Solid means that the producers of the films Saturday Night Fever, Heidi and Capricorn 1 can safely order another box of Havana cigars because the loot is rolling in. My current favourite Variety headline reads, "Sports films click so Whowood works up sweat on jock cycle." If, like me, you're fluent in varieties, you'll know at once that this doesn't mean that Hollywood moguls are keeping fit by riding Scottish bicycles around Beverly Hills. It means that sports films are popular, so Hollywood intends to make lots of them. Jock, I must tell you, even at the risk of bringing a blush to a maidenly cheek, refers to that intimate but invaluable part of every sportsman's equipment, the jockstrap. And now for some items of news. EMI, headed by Lord Delfont, plans to film SOS Titanic about the sinking of that ill-fated liner, while his lordship's no less noble brother, Lord Grade, is planning to salvage the thing in a rival production called Raise the Titanic. The damn ship's going to spend the next few months going up and down like a submarine. Incidentally, EMI have introduced an interesting experiment in Woking, where they've turned a cafe that's been closed for 10 years into a cinema called the ABC2. It's a bit small, only 80 seats, and the screen is a mere 6 feet by 8. But this mini cinema has been made possible by transferring feature films onto video cassettes. Well, all right, you lose a bit of quality that way, but at least it's cheap. Video projection equipment costs only £6,000 or thereabouts, compared with the £20,000 it costs to equip a conventional cinema. Ah, good, I hear you say. That means it must be cheaper to go to the pictures in Woking. Wrong. The seat prices are the same as ever. Still, if it leads to more defunct cafes or even bingo halls being reclaimed for the movies, the Woking experiment must be a step in the right direction. And one more item in the news section. Keith Cowper of Great Bookham in Surrey sent me this advertisement from the Astoria Purley. Richard Burton in wild Greece? What a travolting thought. Well, that brings us rather neatly to this week's awful moment from the movies, suggested by Rodney M. Bennett of West London. It's from Maytime in Mayfair, made in 1949, and it features Peter Graves as a Mayfair couturier who entices customers into his shop by singing at them.
Won't you sing just one more song for me? Just a little one?
Oh, my voice is so tired. You really must excuse me.
Oh, of course. We mustn't overwork that glorious organ of yours, must we?
Well, amen to that, I say. What I also say, as I've said before, is that if you too have some suggestions for awful moments, do send them in and try and find some clean ones, will you? Here's the address, Film 78, BBC TV, London, W12 7RJ. And that brings us more or less to the end of tonight's programme, except that I would like to mention that the 8th annual charity Film Harmonic concert takes place at the Royal Albert Hall on Saturday, October the 28th. As usual, it features a feast of movie music, played this year by the London Philharmonic, and includes a special tribute to 50 years of what is now 20th Century Fox. Among the songs that will be played is one made famous by the gorgeous and incomparable Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So what better way to leave you tonight than with Marilyn singing it herself? The voice may not be all that great, but just look where it comes from. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Till then, good night.
I've heard of affairs that are strictly platonic, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. And I think affairs that you massive was sonic are better bets. If little pets get big baguettes, time rolls on, and youth is gone, and you can't straighten up when you bend. But stiff back or stiff knees, you stand straight and stiff knees.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Good evening. Tonight we'll be taking a look at films from America, Britain, Sweden and Australia, and a nicely mixed bag they all are. From America comes Hooper, with Burt Reynolds starring as the greatest stuntman in the world, and Coma, in which Genevieve Bujold is a hospital doctor mixed up in some weird goings-on. From Britain, though only alas thanks to American currency, we have Glenda Jackson as the splendid and eccentric English poet Stevie Smith. From Sweden, by way of Germany, where the maestro sits brooding in exile, comes Ingmar Bergman's The Serpent's Egg. And in addition to all that, and in view of the fact that an Australian film, Newsfront, opens this year's London Film Festival next week, we'll have a report on the recent revival and even more recent problems of the Australian film industry. And naturally, we'll be showing more awful moments from the movies, and there's a small celebration of 25 years of cinemascope in this country. But let's begin with Hooper, in which Burt Reynolds plays the title role, that of Hollywood's currently greatest stuntman, a sort of walking disaster area, whose body is so full of old wounds and fractures and scars that, as he puts it, his x-rays look like a map of Los Angeles. Breathing heavily down his neck is a new young rival, the wunderkind of stuntmen, played by Jan Michael Vincent. They meet first at a stuntman's charity performance, where Reynolds is determined to prove that he's still number one. Well, the basic theme of Hooper will be immediately familiar to all Western addicts. Think of it, if you will, in terms of the ageing gunfighter coming up against the fast young kid. And just to add to that cosy feeling of déjà vu, Sally Field is the girl who provides Mr. Reynolds home comforts and wants him to retire before he kills himself. A pretty banal plot, therefore, but a great deal of fun nevertheless, and briskly directed by Hal Needham. The big weakness of the film is that although the stunts are increasingly spectacular and culminate in the biggest and most improbable stunt of all, there's no real indication of how stuntmen go about their preposterous work, or the preparation that's necessary before they perform such lunatic deeds as hurling themselves out of helicopters without benefit of parachute. But on the other hand, the script is sharp and witty. There's a clever performance by Robert Klein as a megalomaniac young director making a film called The Spy Who Laughed at Danger, and Burt Reynolds is surprisingly good. Ever since his best film, Deliverance, he's been chucking himself with more enthusiasm than skill into comedy roles, in which hitherto he's never been a great deal funnier than Gingivitis. But in Hooper, the blend of humour and Mr. Reynolds' natural macho style works very well indeed. Here he is watching Jan Michael Vincent give a very passable imitation of a human fly.
Roll the cameras. Come on, good buddy.
Not too shabby.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, we probably could have done that when we were his age, except we didn't have buildings that tall. He's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I have to admit it.
Pretty damn young, too.
Yeah, I hate him. I just hate him. Well?
I thought it was a little slow. If you don't mind, I'd like to have another one, okay?
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Well, Hooper's now on in London and the South, and will be showing in the rest of the country soon. Another American movie now on in the West End is Coma, a thriller set in a hospital in Boston, where an alarming number of young people go into a coma from which they never emerge while on the operating table. Is this merely a tiresome coincidence, to be dismissed with a philosophical shrug and a murmured "you can't win 'em all" uttered through a surgical mask, or is something very sinister going on? Genevieve Bujold, a young doctor, is inclined towards the latter theory. But as the brains of the comatose victims are cut up with bacon slicers and their entrails are held up dripping for our inspection, she finds, as is ever the way in this sort of thriller, that nobody seems to agree with her. Richard Widmark, the kindly old head of the hospital, sends her to a psychiatrist, and her doctor boyfriend, Michael Douglas, is too preoccupied with sulking over the fact that she always seems to beat him into the shower to take her little problem seriously. Even so, it's not at all a bad thriller, and the denouement is really quite tense. Will Miss Bujold be saved in time, or will she come off the operating table minus all her marbles as well as her appendix? Well, I shall say no more, except that she has a very pretty belly button, a fact brought to our attention by one of the nurses in the operating theatre. However, before we have that minor but pleasing revelation, the poor girl suffers great peril, as in this scene in which she's pursued into the hospital mortuary by a would-be assassin. It occurs to me that there are more corpses than live patients in that hospital. Please God, don't ever let me fall ill in Boston. Incidentally, Coma was directed by one doctor, Michael Crichton, from a novel by another, Robin Cook, and one of its effects may well be to deter the squeamish from ever going to hospital again. But now, by way of complete contrast, we have Stevie, in which Glenda Jackson plays Stevie Smith, the remarkable English poet who lived nearly all her life in Palmer's Green and proved that art can flourish even in such an unlikely suburban setting as that. The film was directed by Robert Enders from the stage play by Hugh Whitemore, and essentially it consists of Miss Jackson, aided by Trevor Howard, Alec McCowan, and most splendidly of all by Mona Washbourne as the poet's beloved maiden aunt, reminiscing about her past life. A strange, eccentric lady, Miss Smith, afraid of marriage, obsessed by death, greatly attracted by the thought of suicide, and at the same time wry and witty and very funny indeed. The life we're asked to examine, often in the form of a monologue, as Miss Jackson speaks directly to the camera, is quite unexceptional and even monotonous, yet the film is wholly delightful and Miss Jackson's performance is faultless. Here's a scene early in the film when Stevie, with her aunt, recalls her childhood.
I spent months and months in a children's hospital. I first thought of suicide when I was 8. The thought cheered me up wonderfully. Life may be treacherous, I remember thinking, but you can always rely on death. It also occurred to me that if one can remove oneself from the world at any time, why particularly now? I realized death is my servant. He's got to come if I call him. I think every sensitive young child should learn this. It's a great source of strength and comfort.
More tea, Peggy, dear?
Oh, yes, please. Eventually, of course, I got better. Came back home to Avondale Road. How sweet the birds of Avondale, of Avondale, of Avondale. How sweet the birds of Avondale do swoop and sing and call. My sister Molly and I thought this was a beautiful house and a beautiful garden, and so it was. Well, so it is.
Yeah.
Although our more cautious elders would only sign a lease for the first 6 months, we've been here ever since. Mind you, it was a country place then, with woods stretching all the way up to Southgate Station. But I still find it very dreamy and poetical. The people are charming, too. They have a helpful, non-interfering politeness, which is very like old Chinese courtesy.
Is it 6 o'clock yet?
It was 22.
Oh, soon be time to do the vegetables.
2 old ladies lived next door to us then.
Miss Jessie?
Miss Jessie and Miss Emily.
A smashing film about a smashing lady who had the gift of encapsulating all the commonplace fears and terrors and ambitions and yearnings to which every one of us is prey. Indeed, the only depressing thing about Stevie the movie is that it took an American producer-director, Bob Enders, to envisage it as a film, and it took an American company, First Artists, to put up the £250,000 or so that it cost to make. Thus it turns out to be yet another British picture which, if it had been left to the British, would never have been made at all. But while on the subject of British productions, I think I'd better mention the latest remake of The 39 Steps, of which I said quite confidently in our last programme that it was going to open last week. Well, I only said that because I got it wrong, and the producers and distributors of the film are, as they say in football circles, as sick as parrots about it. I don't know why parrots should be considered to be more liable to sickness than any other creatures, but footballers, who are very simple-minded men on the whole, think they are, and no parrot was ever sicker than the people associated with The 39 Steps, which will in fact have its royal charity premiere on November the 23rd in aid of the Save the Children Fund. And now let's pass on quickly to The Serpent's Egg, Ingmar Bergman's first film as a tax exile from Sweden. I asked Alan Bryan of the Sunday Times, who'd seen the picture before I did, what he thought of The Serpent's Egg, and he said, good in parts. A rotten joke, which I noticed he had the profound sense not to include in his own review. And yet he was right, you know. Bergman's film is set in the Berlin of November 1923, when the Weimar Republic was disintegrating and Hitler was about to attempt his first abortive coup in Munich. Strange, inexplicable murders have been taking place and are being investigated by Inspector Gert Frober. In the centre of all this are David Carradine as an out-of-work, alcoholic, Jewish-American circus artist, which amounts to about as many handicaps as anyone should be asked to bear in the Weimar Republic. Liv Ullmann as his sister-in-law, who sings in cabaret and moonlights in a brothel, as every working girl appeared to do in Berlin in 1923, if the movies are any guide, and Heinz Bennett as a mad scientist conducting obscene experiments. It's all very bleak and doomed, and says hardly more about fascism than cabaret, and rather less than The Damned. But the Berlin sets and atmosphere and Sven Nykvist's photography are marvellously evocative. It's a film that's always worth watching, but is nevertheless disappointing because, by Bergman standards, what it says is both obvious and heavy-handed. Anyway, in this scene, the Nazi bully boys raid the cabaret where Liv Ullmann works.
Ruhe! Unsere Aktion geschieht im Namen des deutschen Volkes! Das ist also die Freiheit, die uns die republikanische Verfassung brachte. Perversitäten und sadistische Sauereien dürfen von geschäftstüchtigen Juden öffentlich zur Schau gestellt werden. Und das Ende? Wenn der Juderei unserer Tage nicht schon bald Einhalt geboten wird, versäuft das deutsche Volk bei lebendigem Leibe. Es versinkt im Morast, in dem alle Völker versunken sind, die sich mit dem Weltverderber Alljude eingelassen haben.
So, und wo ist unser Gastgeber?
Da ist die Judensau!
Mir gefällt Ihre Nase nicht. Nehmen Sie die Brille ab, wenn sie nicht kaputt gehen soll.
I think I ought to tell you that apart from occasional scenes like that, the film is in English, and also that the latest Ingmar Bergman film, Autumn Sonata, will be shown at this year's London Film Festival, which opens on Wednesday with a showing of an Australian picture, Newsfront. This was directed by Philip Noyce, and it takes a look at the life of a newsreel cameraman and his assistant as they work for a small Australian company in the 1940s and 50s. It includes a clever and impressive blend of newsreel footage and real-life action, as this scene reveals.
After 8 years in office under the leadership of first Prime Minister Curtin and then Mr. Chifley, the Australian Labour Party has been defeated at the polls by Mr. Menzies' new Liberal Country Party coalition.
Looks like a big kangaroo, doesn't it?
Mr. Chifley seen here voting. Mr. Menzies casts his choice.
You may think it's funny. Stop it there, will you, Macca? I'm astonished at you, Jeff, for imagining that a piece of bad taste like that was worth your time, my disappointment in you, and the money I'm going to dock from your pay for the ingenious processing work.
Oh, come on.
Astonished. Absolutely astonished.
It was a joke, AG.
And something of a political statement.
Two more serious Australian pictures, The Getting of Wisdom, directed by Bruce Beresford, and The Irishman will be shown early on in the London Festival. This report from Australia gives a background to those productions and the current revival of the Australian industry. A Hollywood-type premiere, all glitter and ballyhoo, was held in Sydney on St Patrick's Day for The Irishman, which cost $650,000 Australian dollars, about £500,000. The film was made by the same team as made Caddy, one of the most popular of the recent new wave Australian pictures, director Donald Crombie and producer Tony Buckley.
We hope The Irishman, if it's as half as successful as Caddy has been, we'll be very pleased, and that will be the reward.
The Irishman concerns the predicament of an Irish teamster whose livelihood is threatened by the introduction of motor vehicles, thus accounting for the horses and dray carts that turned up at the premiere.
I can remember about 5 years ago when there was a stigma attached to an Australian film. In fact, producers and distributors wouldn't advertise the fact that it was Australian. They'd deliberately leave it off the credits or leave it off their advertising material. Today, it's exactly the reverse. Australian audiences seem to seek out Australian films.
In the last 7 years, some 70 feature films have been made in Australia, but the energy and enthusiasm that led to this commendable output is somewhat tempered by the fact that few of the pictures have made any international impact, and none has really broken through in the very important American market. Now, the financial support for these productions has come initially from the Australian Film Commission, a federal body set up in 1971 to revitalise the native industry. And this involvement resulted in a wide range of pictures, often looking back at Australia's past. More recently, the various state governments have also started to finance films, each vying with the others to gain attention and prestige for itself through the quality of the pictures it backs. So, satellite film corporations have sprung up in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, Queensland and South Australia.
We make the best films in Australia. We made Sunny Too Far Away, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Storm Boy. Peter Weir's last film was made with us, and he's going to make another one. Bruce Beresford is just starting to shoot another film, as you know.
People are accessible. I phoned up the Premier's office and I said I'd like an interview with the Premier. When can I have it? And they said tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. Well, that knocked me back. I went in and I said, Mr. Premier, I believe you promised to get behind a Queensland Film Corporation. And he said, yes. So I said, what are you going to do about it? And shall I stay? Or shall I go back to the UK? So I'd like you to stay. So, well, I'm going to stay. People seem to be very, very direct and amenable to suggestions. And I suppose that's because the Australian film industry is really moving now, and everybody is anxious to see us in a world situation. And everybody's caught up in that wonderful excitement. Can I put it this way? I have a feeling that every member of the crew has a feeling that it is their picture, where I didn't experience that a lot in the UK or anywhere else. They were simply doing their job, they were props or sparks or whatever. But here, everybody is making their picture. It's not just the producer, the director, the actors, and the writer, and so forth. And that's a wonderful excitement. Everybody's so keen.
Well, I started making features in Australia. I made 2 films based on the Barry Mackenzie comic strip. They were very successful, really. Then I made a film based on a play, Don's Party, which was also very successful, I'm glad to say. That's how I've kept working. Don's Party was a play by David Williamson, and I even won the Best Director's Award for that, which surprised me. And then I made The Getting of Wisdom, which is from a classic Australian novel set in a girls' school. It's a period film, but it's not one of these petticoat pictures. It's a very earthy kind of thing.
Good heavens.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I only knocked very softly. I thought you said come in.
What can I do for you, young lady?
I'm Laura Tweedle Rambotham, from the college.
Ah, yes. Yes, of course. You came to stay.
Yes, and you quoted some Virgil to me. And I'm having such trouble with my translations.
Well, I believe you have some very fine teachers at the college.
Yes, but, well, you did say, you said if you could help.
Did I?
Good. How do we know he's even in the vestry?
Besides, I don't believe a minister would stoop to such a sordid intrigue with a child of 15.
Oh, come off it, Impy.
Juliet was only 13. She was Italian and Roman Catholic.
Getting a reason that we shot that in 6 weeks, I can hardly believe it. You know, I'd love to have 10 or 11 weeks to do it, but if we go really over about $500,000, we can't get the money back on the home market.
Well, Bruce is, I think, one of our best directors, and he's done about 5 pictures, and he's yet to have a financial failure.
And action, please.
Hey, Eric Jackson?
That's right.
Dixie Sergeant Sammy Rose, hold up squad.
My brother Brian.
I think the success of the industry so far is due in part to the fact that we do keep our budgets down, and we do this through not paying the top people.
Okay, that's good, right.
The director, writer, producer, and the top artists nearly as much as they would get for similar jobs overseas.
In our early days of this current revival, we tended to, you know, just get a script together and grab the money and make anything. You know, not anything, but I mean make a film, you know, at any price sort of thing.
Now the Australian industry has got wonderful technicians, but then they're used to working very quickly, and the actors have been left behind. And when they go into production such as this over such a short period of time, it's like a tidal wave that sweeps over the actors, and they've got no time for repose, they've got no time for pause or reflect. And I think I'd like to see the actors, because being an actor, I'd like to see them given more chance to really think about what they're doing, so you get thought processes, you know, going in the mind.
Yeah, let's not talking about stars, but talking about character actors. That's where we do have a shortage. I mean, for an example, if you have a sequence where you have a walk-on part with 2 lines, a tea lady or something brings coffee into me at this desk. In Australia, we don't have people with the experience of that kind of work.
Australia is going through the same sort of stage that Britain was going through when I was young and just after the war, having been in the Crown Film Unit. And there were a lot of young filmmakers like me starting out in their careers and starting to make films, and we made some good ones, some bad ones. Exactly the same thing is happening in this country now.
While we've made films that have been critically successful all over the world, the facts on paper appear to be that our films just aren't really profitable and require a very, very high level of government finance. So it's a matter really of how long the government is prepared to continue to assist the Australian film industry.
If the Australian Film Commission pulled out tomorrow, there would be no industry.
Our studio costs, equipment costs have inflated to such an extent, they've exploded really. They've done more than inflated.
I doubt whether it will ever get to a situation where we can expend much more than $1 million or $1.25 million as we're now spending on productions.
Also, of course, cinema prices have gone up over the last 12 months, and they're now, I mean, I think hitting nearly £3, which is quite a lot to go to the cinema. And I think since Picnic was released, in fact, audiences have dropped off about 40%. So you've got less chance of making your money back here. I mean, we made our money back here in Picnic within 3-4 months. Which was quite fantastic, but that hasn't been done since. And it is a problem, because now one has got to think, well, if we can't get our money back here, as we have thought we could up till now, then we have to look very seriously at overseas marketing.
There's a serious doubt in my mind as to whether the sort of exercises that the Australian Film Commission and other producers are engaging in to endeavour to crack overseas markets are ever going to be particularly successful.
I think the industry will be commercials, documentaries and telemovies, or productions for television. And I think there will be a few individuals who make feature films.
It really is a number of people. I know most of them. There's not many of them. There's maybe a dozen people working. And some of us will work overseas and come back, and our films will be sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And the industry will therefore rise and fall according to the inspiration of that dozen people.
There are problems. I hope it doesn't collapse.
Right now, there's an air of optimism about director Bruce Beresford's latest production, The Money Movers, which is based on the true story of an armoured car robbery in Melbourne.
Yeah, that's right.
The Australian distributors say that this low-budget thriller has exceeded their expectations, a rare accolade from distributors who tend on the whole to be a jaundiced lot.
That's good.
And they've deferred the picture's release until it can be launched nationwide.
Seen the place he lives in? Seen his car on a patrolman's wages?
So the omens indicate that here is a film which should make a profit on Australia, a comforting thought in itself. But the really important question is yet to be answered, namely, will it prove to be, at last, the film the Aussies have been looking for to help them crack the lucrative American market? So, just to remind you, 3 Australian films will be shown at the London Film Festival: Newsfront, The Getting of Wisdom and The Irishman. And Newsfront will be the next attraction at London's Screen on the Hill. Which brings us neatly into the news section of this programme, because I'd like to point out that a programme of 14 Australian films called The Other Australian Cinema, as opposed to what in the old days one might have called a bit of the other Australian cinema, is now going around the regions. On a different note entirely, John Dade of Brighton sends me this extract from the ABC cinema chain's list of what's on in Brighton and thereabouts. Death on the Nail intrigues me greatly. What is this, the crucifixion, perhaps, as seen through the eyes of Hercule Poirot? Ah, well, let's move on to our awful moments from the movies. William Catton of Chingford in Essex has suggested this scene from The Iron Mistress, made in 1952. It's a curious encounter with Alan Ladd, who plays Jim Bowie, the man who invented the Bowie knife.
Tonight your father had his own worries. Whether I'd left my old life behind or not. More than the knife is gone, Ursula. It's all gone.
Is it? You still wear the sheath?
What do you want to change the subject for? I thought they were talking about knives. Anyway, here's another awful moment of a different kind. It was sent in by John Walden of Benfleet, again in Essex, and I would ask you to look carefully at the shop window as Dorothy Dandridge and Pearl Bailey walk by in the 1954 film Carmen Jones. Not a bad scene, this. I don't think too much of the Mrs. Dandridge and Bailey, but I do think the camera crew looks lovely. Oh, and by the way, if you'd like to see that bit again in context, may I point out that Carmen Jones will be shown at the Curzon Cinema in London next Sunday as part of the 25th anniversary celebrations of the advent of CinemaScope to this country. So as our contribution to those celebrations, I'll leave you with this scene of Dorothy Dandridge singing in the film. Well, actually, it's Marilyn Horne singing, but Dorothy Dandridge does the mouthing, and that's the tricky bit. I'll be back in a fortnight's time. Till then, goodbye.
Love's a baby that grows up wild, and he don't do what you want him to. Love ain't nobody's angel child, and he won't pay any mind to you. One man gives me his diamond stud, and I won't give him a cigarette. One man treats me like I was mud, and all I got that man can get. That's love. He don't do what you want. That's love. No, ain't nobody. That's love. He won't pay any mind. That's love. You go for me, and I'm taboo. But if you're hard to get, I go for you. And if I do, then you are through, boy. My baby, that's the end of you. So take your cue, boy. Don't say I didn't tell